recently I started doing some edge retention testing, and I figured I'd give out the results and what I was doing for the testing. Now, the test knives that I used were this H1 Pacific Salt, Chris Reeve 31 Sebenza S45EN. I actually tested the 15V Manix, but that didn't have the right amount of edges on there to actually make a conclusive argument about its performance. I want at least two more before I get back to testing it. I also tested the K390 Stretch and the Spy 27. Now, the media that I used was a sandpaper roll. Now, I was searching up for 1x30 coarse grit belts because I like to do my own regrinds occasionally on my knives to thin them out for maximum performance. Knowing how abrasive sandpaper actually is and being able to get it in 50-yard rolls for $21, I figured that could be a possible alternative to the rope cut testing. And because you're cutting in air, you don't have to worry about a cutting board. So I decided to opt out or opt in and buy a couple of rolls. I got 100 grit rolls. And what I decided on doing was I wanted to try a very low angle that you don't see in most testing. I wanted to try for 20-degree inclusive. I didn't think I'd be able to maintain 20 inclusive on all my knives without doing regrinds. And I was unhappy with this goniometer to make sure that I was giving an accurate depiction. What I decided on was was to use an edge angle guide of 13 degrees and set a micro bevel. Now, the stones that I used were the 400 grit Supervit Big Brown Bear stone, and I would micro bevel on the 1000 grit. I would set a clean apex on this as low as possible and use the micro bevel to actually do my testing. 13-degree micro bevel, 5 passes per side. I could do whatever I wanted on this stone as long as I kept to 5 passes per side and set a 13-degree micro bevel with this angle guide. That's exactly what I used for my testing. Now, in order to make the counts for my testing, I would do 10 cuts, and I would cut against the backing. I would fold it over and cut, and I'd get these little ribbon guys. And I would make stacks of 10, and I would use the index card method that I've explained before to test to see if the actual apex itself would surpass the red line. I use that for my carry protocol to actually give validation of when I'm actually calling the test to be over. Most people use paper. If you use a regrind on a knife with the right amount of downward force, you'll cut the paper. I try using just the apex itself to actually determine if there's still cutting ability. Now, what will happen is when the apex is flat, it pushes the card down. It doesn't bite, okay? I want it to cut through, and I use cutting, and I use a marker to determine if the knife is serviceable to continue carry, or testing. Originally, I tried using a 13-degree micro bevel on the Supervit and the Spyderco medium bench stone. I used the same amount of passes, but I noticed I did 4 tests. Well, actually, I only did 2 tests with that, actually, with the H1 and the S45EN. I believe with the ceramic, I would need more passes. However, to simplify things, I'm only going to give you the results from the 1000 grit Supervit diamond stone. Now, the H1 Pacific Salt, after 50 passes, it was borderline, like hanging on by a thread. I gave it 5 more cuts, and then it failed. So I'm chalking this one up to 55. This S45 VN, 13-degree micro bevel, 5 passes per side. I got 110 cuts before it no longer was able to pass the finish line. The 15V Manix that was only on edge number 2, I got 310 cuts. When I go back to test it again, 310 may be the limit for this micro bevel. There could be much more performance, but I'm constrained with the edge finish, the edge angle, and the amount of passes that I'm actually doing. The next knife was the K390 Stretch. Stretch being one of my favorite Spydercos, K390 is a fantastic steel. This had a little more cutting edge than the knives that I was using before. And I felt it was folding the index card, but it had a little more edge length, so the very tip was doing more passing of the finish line. I got 300 cuts with this K390. Very happy with it. Anybody who's used the Seki City K390 from Spyderco, I have nothing but positive experiences, positive thoughts about what this steel actually can do. The next steel was Spy 27. Now, I did not like how testing was going with Spy 27. I concluded after this test that there should be a regulation, because I wanted to do 4-inch cutting edge knives. And with this, I found myself not making full cuts all the way through, it hanging on by a thread. So what I've decided was to actually create weight classes, if you will, where I want 1.9 inches of cutting edge times 1.5, because this is a 1.5 inch diameter roll. They make bigger ones, they make smaller ones, but they had the 1.5 inch, which is what I went with. This is just a small sample. I mean, I'm not going to bring 50 yards out here, but this is how long it actually is. I just stand over my countertop, fold it down, make the cut, and make stacks of 10, and then test the knife. Test the apex itself. The more I go through the testing, the more I'm changing things, the more I'm fine-tuning what I like, what I think is appropriate and trying to give accurate results as best as possible. I'm using super vitrified diamond stones to actually make a clean edge and then set the micro bevel. And I'm using micro bevels as my test bed. And I'm doing 100 grit sandpaper because I feel that this is an alternative to rope cut testing. I think price-wise, very abrasive material. You're able to actually cut it in air instead of using like a cutting board to actually cut it. I mean, I've tried rope cut testing in the past, and, well, it's not the funnest of things to do. The next knife that will be for testing is the S90V Shaman. I know Sean has the 15V version coming out very soon. It was just launched on the new Spyderco reveal. Should be an amazing knife. I've been cutting a lot of stuff. However, I figured I'd just do a quick update on what my testing is, the results I've gotten, and just explaining. Now, I have other edge angles, but I decided to go with the 13. You could go with a higher micro bevel if you wanted to. I could go with more passes, but this is what I'm using to restrain myself, to give myself regulations, to kind of organize things. I mean, I don't feel like taping up one section or 1 inch of blade and trying to do, whatever. I feel like if you are keeping the certain cutting edge lengths with a certain diameter rolls, I'm sticking with the 100 grit. I mean, it could be different with 200, 300, 40. We're going with the 100 because I think that's right in between of what most people would actually use. Now, in real life, if I had to cut this stuff for a living, I wouldn't even set an apex. I would just plateau sharpen and just remove, you probably can't see it, but just basically make sure that there's no reflection of light. Obviously set the geometry very thin, and because the abrasive in the sandpaper is going to dull the edge, I would just rely mostly on geometry to actually do what I wanted my knife to do. Because knowing why even bother? Just use geometry. Let that apex be flat and just make your cutting through geometry. I mean, that makes the most sense to me. Anyways, those are my results. 55 for the H1, 110 for the S45, 300 for the K390, 310 for the 15V Manix, and the Spy 27, I got 130 cuts. And this is where it actually ended. And it's right there, but it didn't pass. I did 2 verification. I did 1 cut and then another verification. And, well, that's the numbers that I got.